Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the one-stop shop for actors and creators both above and below the line. I am your host, Vinny Mancuso, Backstage senior editor and professional entertainment obsessive. I'll be your guide through every corner of the creative industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. Here you'll find intimate, in-depth talks with today's most award-worthy names in film, television, and theater. Along the way, we'll get advice on living your best creative life, relatable stories of the highest highs and lowest lows, and maybe, just maybe, a rare peek in the envelope.
I think that we are at a point, generally as an audience, where we can find characters interesting that we don't see ourselves in at all. Like, you don't have to see yourself in somebody to be fascinated or interested, root for someone. And I'm really happy we're at that place, because I really spent years arguing this point.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. I am your host, Vinny Mancuso, and I regret to report that we are, in fact, halfway through this year already. Somehow, against all odds and reasoning, we are deep into June. But that does mean one thing: Emmys buzz is building. Who better, my friends, to discuss that buzz than a Yellowjacket? Yes, today we were lucky enough to get some time with the Christina Ricci, Wednesday Addams herself, certified 90s icon, and, in my opinion, the standout performance from one of this season's best shows. If you haven't seen Yellowjackets yet, I urge you to do yourself a favor and do so. It is drop everything and devote your life to fan theories. Fantastic. It's Lord of the Flies meets Lost with like a little bit of Twin Peaks in there. It's a wild show. It takes place in two different timelines. The great Karen Kusama directed the pilot. It's just wonderful. And the work that Christina Ricci specifically does, particularly in tandem with the actor who plays her younger self, Samantha Hanratty, is truly, truly remarkable. It's the highlight of the show, and it was just a pleasure to get to sit down for a little bit and pick her brain about the performance. I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed it. Let's get right into it. Here is Christina Ricci. For your Emmy consideration for Outstanding Comedy Series and all other categories, the HBO Max original series The Flight Attendant returns for another thrilling season. In Season 2, Cassie Bowden, played by Kaylee Cuoco, is living her best sober life in Los Angeles while moonlighting as a CIA asset in her spare time. But when an overseas assignment leads her to inadvertently witness a murder, she becomes entangled in another international intrigue. All episodes now streaming on HBO Max. Christina Ricci has been the face of on-screen oddities and outsiders for 30 years and counting. After the role of Wednesday Addams turned her into a teen idol, Ricci remained a Hollywood staple, graduating to even darker, more dramatic roles in projects like The Ice Storm, Sleepy Hollow, and Monster. Recently, she garnered Emmys buzz with Showtime's dark drama Yellowjackets, in which she plays Misty, an unhinged show tune enthusiast with homicidal tendencies. Here is the one and only Christina Ricci. How are you doing? How's it going? Sorry for the technical rigmarole.
No. It's always helpful to be guided through.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm very excited to be talking to you, and I'm very excited to be talking about Yellowjackets, a show I have been thinking about for several months, cannot stop thinking about, and I'm glad I can go to the source.
I might not have as many answers as you'd like, but
That's okay. Well, I guess we'll find out. But before we dive into the specifics of the show, I am interested in just sort of the fact that it is such a show about how the past affects a person. And I'm wondering, in your experience having done the show and now you're talking about the show, how often do you sort of take stock of your past, of your career? Is it something you reflect on often, or is it something that is, forward facing?
No, I mean, I generally only, I'm forced to, not forced, but I generally only really reflect on it or analyze my life in that way when I'm doing press and I'm asked about it. So, I do actually think about it more than probably is normal because I do press a lot. But yeah, I do take it into consideration a lot. And I have spent time obviously weighing how much it affects me and my art and all that stuff.
Is there any sort of, I don't know, lesson you've gotten from that? It is very, I can't imagine having to, go back to my own past that often, because I don't do press. I ask the questions. I'm always very curious. Like, is there something you've taken from it that maybe you're like, oh, I'm glad I got that lesson. I'm glad that came up.
Well, I've been doing it for 35 years. So the amount of lessons I've learned over time are just so copious. I don't know that I could pick any one thing, and that is what's so incredible is that every project is a new set of circumstances and people and new problems. And going through those problems is how we all learn, So yeah, I mean, every single job I've done and situation I've been in has really shaped how I view everything.
And it is interesting because, to do this interview, I sort of tried to look at the shape of your overall career. And it's a fascinating career. And I think especially because there are such, definable eras, and you sort of found success in those various eras of your career. I'm wondering if there's something that triggers the change is there something where you recognize, it's time for a change. It's time for me to go into something new.
Because my career has been so long and I started as a child, most of the changes that have happened in my career have coincided with, no longer being a kid, doing adult movies, various things like having a child and then that affecting. So because my life and career are so intertwined that most of the things that have changed have been a result of just the natural progression of age in a person's life, I think.
You've sort of, throughout the whole time, been very open about how you're the kind of characters you're drawn to. You've always been drawn to outsiders. And I'm curious if the reason has changed at all. The what hasn't changed, but I'm wondering if the why has changed and why that was.
Well, I don't think when I was younger, I could have really articulated why I am attracted to outsiders but now I do sort of understand, that I have always myself I'm not a person who understands group mentality. I don't understand needing to join a group. I don't understand needing other people to validate your taste and choices and having to agree with everyone all the time. I'm very much somebody who I'm very independent, I guess. And just by virtue of, I guess, being a child actress and leaving school and coming back and being very autonomous in socially, I think resulted from that. And then as I've gotten older, I've kind of always been able to look at things from that perspective of being welcomed into all kinds of different circles, but not really ever feeling like I belonged. And realizing, I think when you're 10 and you realize that you don't really need validation from your peers to be happy and also what it shows you, it's like I got to work and give validation professionally and then go and have peers and have friends. And I think because so much of my validation came from my profession, I didn't need that in social situations. So because I've kind of always been in that situation, I think I naturally not empathize. Yeah, maybe empathize with people who also are somewhat isolated and different and yeah.
I think you've gotten to a point where you've almost graduated to that beloved figure status, and that sort of factors into the casting of Yellowjackets. It's a lot of people who are cast in this show are people who I think the audience, they know them from when they were young, so they have a sort of idea of what they're expecting. I'm curious when you were brought into Yellowjackets, how you saw that working for you, especially as like it's almost like your casting is part of the show. It's part of the aesthetic.
I don't know how intentional that was with Juliet and Melanie and me. I haven't actually heard the writers answer that question. But I really wanted to be a part of the show because I knew the concept. Early on, I met with Drew Comans, and it was just a general meeting, and he had sort of pitched me the pilot and the concept of the show, and I thought it sounded really fun. He hadn't specifically mentioned like any like what character I would play or what that kind of thing. But then when they did come to me with the character and I read script, what I really loved was this specific character. And I loved the way she operated. And I've been kind of trying for a long time to use passive aggression. Like, I really think passive aggression is rampant, and especially when you take into account someone's physiology. So like, I'm a very small, harmless woman. I cannot be openly hostile in public with strangers. It is just not smart. But I can be as passive aggressive as I want, and then people are confused as to whether, you know what I mean? Like, it's
absolutely, yeah,
a way of expressing rage that is safe for someone like me, purely by virtue of being so small and harmless, really, physically harmless. And I've always really, and it is a big part. I find it is very common with women, and because we don't feel safe physically. So it's something that I've tried to do and play with in other characters and felt was really appropriate. And I've always kind of come up against a lot of what would be the word? What word am I looking for? A lot of
resistance. Not
that was the word. Okay, come up with a lot of resistance because it is not a straightforward version of rage and anger. But we as human beings do not express things straightforwardly, and so many different things to come in to affect how we express ourselves, and all these different elements. And so I've always been frustrated by that resistance. And so then to get to play a character where like in the pilot, her only scene, it's like completely so petty and small and passive aggressive and hostile and just like so twisted. And I really, really loved that. I loved that someone had just written hey, this is one of your leads. And she abuses old people.
Absolutely. And well, that's one of the things I love about the show is it feels like what feels so new about it is there are all these leads and really none of them are good people. Like there's not really like your way into the show. And that's almost an extension of that resistance you were seeing where there was always that idea that's like, but they're not likable. We can't put them on screen. And it sort of feels like that shift where it's like, well, maybe they don't need to be likable. Yeah,
I've kind of always said that my big argument is that people are always saying relatable. Like we need to relate to that character. And I think that we are at a point as a whole, generally as an audience, where we can find characters interesting that we don't see ourselves in at all. Like you don't have to see yourself in somebody to be fascinated, interested, root for someone. And I'm really happy we're at that place because I really spent years arguing at this point.
Well, was that the starting point for Misty for you? Was it really recognizing that kernel of, oh, I have a chance to do something that I wanted to do, and this seems like a vehicle for it?
Yeah, I mean, but it was on the page. She was written this way, so I was finally presented with a character that did operate in this way. So I was very excited about that, and that was really mainly, that was why I wanted to be a part of the show.
You did mention that the Misty is only in one scene of the pilot. But it's sort of, what's really great about the filmmaking level of it, the performance level of it, is you kind of get everything you need to know about the character from that one scene. And so I'm curious. Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious what your approach is to a one scene performance. How you ensure that everything is coming across that needs to come across.
Well, the writing was so good that every beat was there, and I knew who she should be in that scene, and I didn't really have to worry about it. I mean, that's one of the luxuries of working with like really incredible writers, and Karin Kusama is like an incredible director. Like, yeah. Just sort of was all on the page. So I just did what I thought I should do, and Karin made subtle adjustments and stuff. But it's so easy with great writing.
Has that always been the constant? Is it sort of been, if there's great writing, you can do great work, and if there's not great writing, you sort of have to go that extra mile? Has that always been the constant?
Yeah, I mean, really, when you see a scene and you can't figure out how to play it, if it's a character that you actually understand and have played for a while, then probably there's something a little up with the writing.
I'm curious what makes it great writing, because I because of who we are, because of, we're Backstage, and there's a lot of early career creatives, a lot of early career writers who they're sort of just starting, and I think hearing something that inspirational would make a listener of this show say, well, I would love to do great writing. I would love to give Christina Ricci a script that she knows what to do. So I'm curious, what makes great writing for you?
Well, I think it's different for different styles of filmmaking and TV. As an actor, I always feel like it's great writing when the dialogue evolves in such a way that if you're having trouble memorizing your dialogue, it's probably because the scene doesn't make sense. Because usually somebody says something or asks a question, and then the answer as your character is, you kind of get what the next response would be to a certain extent, so that it's not so hard to remember because the scene just follows and it makes sense. Anytime that I'm having a really hard time remembering dialogue, I kind of step back and just think, well, does this make sense? And naturally, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's one way that I recognize it. Other than that, I mean, I'm not a writer, so I can only tell you from an actor's perspective. And that's one little thing that I have noticed.
Yeah, well, I think the actor's perspective is fascinating because, the job as the writer is to make your job that much easier. And I think that I love the shout out of, the great writing. And Yellowjackets especially, I think that the juggling act of that show is very hard. And I think that bleeds through into every aspect of the performances too.
Yeah, and I think the tone is so specific on the show. And yeah, it's just, and it's because, Bart and Ashley and Jonathan are so in sync and really involved, and they are the source of that specific tone. So I think they really keep it, I don't know, it's just so balanced, and they manage to do that so incredibly.
It's kind of a balance for you as well, because I think that on a lot of lesser shows, Misty might just become comic relief, and at no point does she. And I'm curious how you handle that on a sort of moment-to-moment basis, because that's not to say the character isn't funny, but she never becomes the comic relief character.
Yeah, I was really, I really didn't want that for her to just be the comic relief and for things to feel stunty or too caricature-ish. So we would just, I think, sometimes in writing scripts, you put something in that will elicit the response you want, but in maybe a less subtle way. And then you can take the spirit of that and make it a little bit more grounded. And we did a lot of that throughout. I would change certain props she was supposed to use or drinks she ordered and things like that to just make them a little less hilarious.
It's interesting that you mentioned you wanted to change the props. That's going to a level of detail that you wouldn't need.
The whole scene is about me doing something with a prop.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, so I get we need to have a funny scene, but maybe we don't use something that is so over the top hilarious. So it's not like I generally am that, but literally with her, a lot of it is oh, hilarious. She's sitting there with a bird, or oh my God, she asked for a chocolate martini, so because the scenes would be specifically about those character details, that's when we would work on what was the right level of funny, but not clownish.
And how does that work sort of from a pure character creation process? When you're finding who Misty is on a moment to moment level, is there a trial period where you'll try out a quirk or something she does and you're like, that doesn't feel like her?
Not really. I mean, mine isn't that conscious, and I just sort of trust my instincts. And generally those sort of mannerisms and stuff happen almost subconsciously.
Well, I was going to ask about the mannerisms because I do, and it's interesting to hear that because I think this character and every character you played is sort of a masterclass in creating small quirks of a character. So when you say it happens subconsciously, how do you recognize it as a genuine character beat and not something that feels like a choice?
Well, it isn't. I mean, people talked a lot about the fact that me and Sammy pushed our glasses up in the same way. But I found not being, I find that there aren't that many ways to push up glasses that are slipping off of your face.
Yeah, I know that very well. I know that very well.
And like this, pushing it, like that makes a lot of sense. And so Sammy did the same thing. We didn't even talk about it. And then also, you know, if the character is somebody who is manipulative and there's a lot of artifice in her, the facade she puts together. And there's probably going to be a certain way of walking that is not intimidating, doesn't betray the fact that she has power. You know, maybe he's even, someone who is, I don't know. It's just they don't feel like choices because they all follow the story and the character and they just make sense. You know, I'm wearing Crocs. So you'd walk a certain way when you wear Crocs all the time. Also. So like all of those little things come into play. And I think it's just a matter of like being comfortable enough to let those things happen instead of like noticing all the time what you're doing.
Were you always at that level of comfort, or is that a level of comfort you had to find?
I've been on camera since I was 7 years old. So do you think that's something that just comes from growing up? Or it comes from just spending time on camera. You know, you get more comfortable with things the more you do them. So
was there a moment where you recognized that that was the way to do it? Or was that just, like you mentioned, you've been in front of a camera since you were a kid. But was there a conscious moment where you're like, oh, I can trust my instincts. This is how you do it. Or did that just happen?
No, I've always kind of trusted myself when it comes to acting, you know. It's the one constant in my life. It's a thing I've been doing forever. And it is the one thing that I don't feel like. I think everyone has to have one thing they don't feel very insecure about. And that's my one thing. I always think that I'm terrible anytime I watch myself, but then that goes away. I think that's a natural kind of like self-hating thing.
Well, I was going to ask, because we started off by asking how often you reflect on your career. So I wanted to bring that into a smaller level of how often do you literally watch your career?
Not very often, no. But, you know, I have like recently shown my kids some stuff I've done, or like, you know, my husband has, and but that's when I'll see it. I don't like sit down on my own and watch anything.
For your Emmy consideration for Outstanding Comedy Series and all other categories, the HBO original series Insecure follows Issa, Molly, and their unbreakable friend group as they continue to navigate formative experiences in the heart of LA. The 5th and final season follows our favorite characters as they evaluate their relationships, both new and old, in an effort to figure out who and what comes with them in the next phase of their lives. All episodes now streaming on HBO Max. I think one of the joys of doing this podcast is like, I don't understand acting. I clearly just don't understand how it works. So to hear how instinctual it is for you is almost something that I can't comprehend.
Well, I mean, it's like if you remember being a child and playing make-believe, it really is like you just have to like have that same level of commitment.
Is that sort of what originally pulled you towards it?
Yeah. Well, I was sort of, I was sort of discovered, I guess, in a school play, and then my family thought I should try it, and I was like, sure, that sounds fun. And then I realized that that was sort of what it felt like as a kid. That's the closest thing that I could relate it to.
Is that how you've always felt throughout the entire time, or is that something you recognized again later?
Well, I think it changes as you get older, and you know, you obviously analyze things more carefully, and there's a little bit more, it's a little bit more in depth than that. But at its core, what you're doing after they call action is the same kind of make-believe role play stuff that you did with a little bit more like skill and nuance and technical needs, pretty much.
Exactly. I want to go back to the idea of that manifestation of rage is how you've described Misty a lot. But something I find interesting about the performances is very bottled up.
She can't express her rage. She only has one way. And, you know, it's through gritted, smiling teeth, and that's it. And she will never show anyone who she really is. I don't think. I think sometimes she slips, but it's not, but not for very long. And I don't think she would ever show anybody, or try not to. I mean, she obviously breaks and shows Reika's character in the basement. But I think in general, this is like she's like a stress doll, like someone who's been squeezed is how I like to think about most people.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel very often. That's how I feel whenever I'm preparing for something like this.
Product of years of squeezing.
Exactly, yeah. But I think that goes back to, the idea of, you need to find something relatable about a character. But I think that idea for so long was you need to find something positive to relate to a character. But I think that the idea of a manifestation of rage, very relatable. And I think that's part of what makes it.
Well, yeah, it's the way she expresses rage. It's the way her rage manifests. It's passive aggressive, and I think it is. Well, that's why I argued for so long to have this be a viable sort of option for certain characters, or at times for certain characters, because I do feel like it's something very commonplace and not really explored enough.
On a technical level, and again, I kind of want to avoid asking technical questions because it sounds very instinctual for you. But I am curious. You mentioned how her mask slips, and I'm wondering what the creation process is of creating that mask and then letting it shine through.
I mean, it isn't as conscious as what you're saying, but before, Misty's whole, people stand differently, people approach differently, the attitude, and Misty's attitude is very buttoned up emotionally, and very buttoned up emotionally. Letting it slip is written in the thing, so I follow the writing.
It goes back to good writing. It all goes back to good writing.
It does.
But it's interesting because you don't always have. In a show like this, you literally get to see in the past scenes, you get to see where all of this is coming from. And I'm curious what that experience is like for you, having a very clear, this is why she's like this. This is the moment where this was.
Yeah.
Revealed.
I mean, yes, there is a lot of that. It's true. But I think that with Misty's character, there is still so much missing. And I don't feel like I've seen much of why she is the way she is. I've seen like broad strokes, and I get that. And it's fun to see like the first time she really lies about something and all that stuff. And then you can like extrapolate, obviously. But I think there's so much that went on that we still haven't seen. And I'm so excited to see that stuff because like you're saying, it is incredibly informative and helpful for me. I can't wait. I hope we see a lot, like even more. Obviously, we're going to in season 2.
I have seen you say elsewhere that you don't want to know, though. You're not the type to ask the showrunners those questions. And
I don't like to have any constraints or limits. I feel like I never want to be in a situation where I can't do what I do because of some limitation. And I found with TV that you are very often asked to perform without really knowing. It's so different than film. Film, the entire arc of your character. Every action that you have to justify with behavior. And with TV, you just don't have that luxury for whatever reason. A lot of times people want to keep things fluid. So they do have the ability to change what the story is, to change what your character does. And I get that. That's part of making television. So I want to be really good at always performing without knowing and more comfortable with the not knowing. And I feel like it's a specific muscle you need for TV. And I want to get really good at that. I don't want to need to know in order to do my job.
So it's more like you'd rather find it naturally.
No, I just rather be able to act under any circumstance. I don't want to be somebody who can't figure out who the character is because they haven't found out what they're doing in the rest of the season. That's terrifying to me because at the end of the day, it's you on camera. The only thing that comes across the end of the day is the performance. So you can't have anything that makes you unable to do it.
I'm curious what that's like for you in between seasons. I've asked other actors sort of where that character goes in between seasons, because you're sort of living in that role, and then it ends. In the case of Yellowjackets, it ends on a cliffhanger, and then you're in between the show. And I'm curious, do you continue to shade in anything in between seasons, or do you put it on a shelf and come back to it?
The thing that I've now learned with TV shows like this is that you do press constantly from the time it's over until the time you start again. So you do nothing but talk about the character and think about her. And in some ways, it has been really informative to talk about her so much. And like even my idea of what I would add or how I would change things. Like all of those little things have come up. And, I have a few new just approaches now and like thoughts about her. And I'm excited to play her again now, feeling like I understand even more by virtue of having talked about her so much, and heard other people talk about her as well. So for me with this character, I just kept talking about her. But I don't know in another situation what would happen.
Well, I'm curious how you sort of avoid all. It's very interesting to hear because I only have to have this conversation once. You have to have it a million times, and I'm curious how you avoid letting that shade the character, because I have my reaction to the character.
I would actually let anybody shade the character. I'm not like that. But in talking about the character, I have come to understand the character, I think, a little bit better, or have a different take on just like slight little changes. But I think all that's been beneficial. I don't think it's been harmful. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm curious what your experience has been like experiencing the audience reaction to the character, because it is one of those things. The show has been, it seems like it's still finding new audiences to this day. And the reaction to Misty has been very, it's the type of character that sort of builds a following. I'm curious how that process has been for you, all of that.
It's been great. I mean, it's so gratifying to see people respond to the show and love it. And it's fun to be a part of something that everyone says is like a phenomenon of sorts. And I love Misty. So it makes me really happy. Again, I am somebody who I don't really seem to be able to feel other people's experiences. So like I'm not out and about very much. So I kind of feel like I understand intellectually that this has gone on, but emotionally, like it's not really tangible to me. It's not a visceral thing. I think that I am capable of experiencing. I'm sure other people are, but I don't think I am.
Interesting. That's very interesting to hear. And it's especially interesting because I believe you just wrapped on Wednesday, which is a show sort of built from a character you create. You're obviously not playing the same character, but that's built on the idea of a character you played that then became a phenomenon. So I'm curious what the experience was that, because it's kind of a much larger version of what I was saying between seasons. You were returning to a creative environment that for 22 years in between that. I'm curious what that was like for you.
It was really fun. I loved working with Tim again, and it was great to be a part of. I was really happy they asked me. And it is a world, the Addams world is something that I was a part of, but this version is really different. The production design is really different. It's obviously different cast. So it felt more familiar because I had worked with Tim before. Then it felt like I was returning to the Addams Family world that I personally had known.
Is there any sort of anything that needs to be done to get when there is that 22-year gap between working with someone like Tim Burton? Is there a moment where you have to get on that wavelength again, or is that the kind of thing?
He's an amazing director. I mean, he's so good, and he's immediately, it's like effortless working with him, and you completely trust him, and no matter what he says, you do, because he's a genius. And it's effortless.
I'm just noticing that I only have a few more minutes. So I want to get to the sort of very much nitty-gritty advice for new up-and-coming actors, because that's the Backstage audience. So I guess the best way to start is what piece of advice would you give your younger self? What piece of advice did you wish you had at the beginning of that career?
Oh, I would give this advice to anybody starting in pretty much any field, and certainly in an artistic field. You should always be open to constructive criticism, but also find the thing that you do that's special and do that thing. No matter how strange the thing is you're good at, if you're the only person who does that and does it beautifully, then that is the thing you should play to. I guess it's play to your strengths, I guess, even if they're not popular at the time.
And, as you mentioned, and to piggyback off that, you identified your niche, and you were so incredible at that. And I'm curious what your advice specifically would be for an actor looking to find their niche, to find that thing that they're good at. Or is that just experiment?
I'm not sure how you find it. I think you follow your natural inclinations. Look at the way you look at the take you have on a scene. Look at the way you play something that's different than somebody else. And what is that thing, I guess?
Incredible. Well, I want to say thank you again for taking the time to talk to me. And I cannot stress enough, this show kind of took over my life for a little bit. And it's still
awesome. That's cool.
I myself can't wait for season 2. You seem excited for season 2. And congrats on everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage. Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Casey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.